Hi, everyone. I just wanted to spend the next couple of minutes giving you some insight to what we call the three I's of COVID-19. There's been many questions about this process, and people just wanted a quick reference. As we've talked about previously, we need to understand the disease process of COVID-19 in the terms of incubation, infection, and immunity, the three I's. So this all starts at the time of exposure. And exposure is considered direct contact with an infected individual when you are within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, or you've had intimate contact, playing sports, hugging, kissing, or other intimate touching, and then obviously kind of sharing food particularly, or other circumstances where you might be considered a direct contact. The hard and fast rule is if you spent 6 feet, if you're within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more with someone, irregardless of location, whether it's inside, outside, mask or no mask, you're considered a direct contact. So from the time of exposure until the times symptoms show up is called incubation. That period of time we know is somewhere between 1 and 30 days. Most people will demonstrate symptoms within the first 14 days, and this is why we quarantine for 14 days. On average, though, most people will demonstrate symptoms, if they're going to demonstrate symptoms, by day 5 or 6 of the illness. And this is why we wait at least 5 days to begin testing. Following incubation, then comes infectiousness. And incubation and the infectious period actually overlap with each other. This is the unique aspect of COVID-19, and that we know that people, when they're about 24 to 48 hours before the presentation of symptoms, we know that they're probably at their most highly infectious state. So people are most infectious when their symptoms are just beginning to show up. The infectivity duration is somewhere between about 10 to 14 days. And this is why we isolate should you become infected at 10 days. And what we do know is that symptoms can last for weeks and even months, but typically are not a sign of infection after about a 10 to 14 day period of time. After that time frame then becomes the immune period. And the immune period right now is, kind of pretty unclear to us. We don't know how long and how much. So how long does immunity last? And how much of immune response do we have to have in order to protect ourselves? As it stands right now, we're thinking that this is probably weeks and months relative to years. So this is probably likely going to be something that we have to get vaccinated for on a yearly basis, similar to flu. We may also need 2 shots, one at the beginning to stimulate the immune process and a booster later on. So as we get, kind of given the grace of time, we'll get a better idea of what the immune period looks like. But generally speaking, this is how COVID-19 lays out: the incubation period, the infectious period, and the immune period. And based on its behavior in each one of these 3 periods is why we quarantine, test, and isolate the way that we do. So given that understanding, what should you do? If you are exposed, as we talked about, stay home to quarantine for 14 days from the last time you were in contact with that infected person. So the last minute you were in contact is when your day 14s start. If you're quarantining, you only want to seek testing no earlier than 5 days from exposure. The reason for this testing is to help us as a community know where the infections are being spread. You want to look for antigen or PCR testing, which is kind of testing for the virus. Antibody testing is not yet useful for diagnosis. It helps us do surveillance. So again, seek testing after you've been exposed for at least 5 days, looking for a PCR or an antigen test. If your test is negative, you still stay home for the full 14 days and consider retesting perhaps closer to the end of your quarantining period. If your test is positive, you stay home and you begin isolating for a full 10 days. If you have symptoms, that 10 days begins from the day one of your symptoms. If you are asymptomatic, that 10 days begins from the day of the test. That's it. That covers the 3 I's of COVID-19. And so hopefully that answers most of your all's questions.